If I help you carry the firewood, will you chase the bad men out of my house?" The boy's voice was small, but it cut through the silence of the ravine like a whip crack. He was hungry. You could see it in the hollows of his cheeks. He was desperate. You could see it in the way his eyes, too old for his face, locked onto the stranger. He said it to a lone Apache warrior, a man who looked like he'd been carved from the desert itself. And in that moment, neither of them knew their fates had just been welded together forever. It was 1876. The air was thick with dust and endings. The man, we'll call him One, walked with the slow, deliberate gait of someone who wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere because there was nowhere left to go. His horse, a creature of bone and hide, followed a few paces behind. It was a mirror of its master, weary, resilient, and surviving on next to nothing. From One's neck, 3 wooden talismans dangled, clicking softly with each step. A quiet, rhythmic beat. One for each child he never had. Carved during nights so dark and long, the only thing keeping him company was the weight of his own choices. He'd left his tribe, walked away when the elders screamed for war, for blood to answer blood. "Revenge is a circle," he'd told them, his voice low. "It never ends." They hadn't listened, or maybe they had, and that was why they let him go so easily. "An Apache who turns his back on war is no Apache at all," they had whispered behind his back. But One knew the truth. Being Apache was in his bones, deeper than any weapon he could hold. The sun was bleeding across the horizon when he saw it. A small cabin, tucked into the shadow of the Las Cruces ravine. It looked like it was hiding. Smoke curled from its chimney, a thin, timid line, almost apologizing for being there. The barn next to it was slanted, looking like one good gust of wind would send it tumbling to the ground. And that's where he saw the boy, Emiliano, 10 years old, but carrying the world on his shoulders. He was wrestling a bundle of firewood nearly twice his size, his thin arms shaking with the strain. But he wouldn't drop it. He refused. When he saw One, his eyes went wide, the look of a cornered animal, but he didn't run. No, this boy stood his ground. He straightened his back, what little of it he had, and stared at the warrior with a seriousness that was heartbreaking. That's when he asked the question. "If I help you carry the firewood, will you chase away the bad men from my house?" One stopped his horse. The boy's words weren't a plea. They were a business transaction, a deal offered by a child who had learned, far too young, that nothing in this God-forsaken world was free. The Apache warrior swung a leg over his horse, his joints groaning in protest after days on the trail. He moved slowly, deliberately, watching the boy. Emiliano didn't back away, but a tension coiled in his small frame, tight as a bowstring. What men? One's Spanish was rough, edged with the guttural sounds of his own tongue. "The men from San Gerardo," the boy said, his voice barely a whisper. "They come every week. They say my father's never coming back from the war. They say my mom owes them, just for living here." The boy's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. This boy had forgotten how to cry. "Mom gives them everything we have, but it's never enough. Last time they said if we didn't have more, they'd take the chickens, or worse." One's gaze shifted to the cabin. He saw it with new eyes now. Not just a home, but a fortress under siege. Planks of wood nailed over the inside of the windows, scuff marks and deep dents in the door, where someone had tried to force their way in. And from the one uncovered window, a curtain twitched. Someone was watching him. "Your mother is inside?" One asked. "Yes." Emiliano's voice dropped even lower. "She's sick with fear. She doesn't sleep anymore. She just waits. She waits for them to come back." Without another word, One reached out and gently took the bundle of firewood from the boy's arms. It felt like nothing in his grasp. Emiliano stared, his mouth slightly open in awe at the effortless display of strength. Come on, one said. Let's take this inside. As they walked towards the rickety cabin, the boy kept stealing glances at him. You're really an Apache? Yes. You're not going to do anything bad? One stopped. He turned and looked the boy square in the eyes. What bad things? The men from San Gerardo. They say Apaches eat children. They say you burn houses. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the corner of one's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Then the men from San Gerardo don't know the difference between an Apache and a demon. The cabin door creaked open before they reached it. A woman stood there. Rosario Herrera. She held a long kitchen knife in her hands, and though they trembled, she held it like she knew how to use it. She was in her early 30s, with a beauty that hadn't been softened by life, but sharpened by it. Her skin was the color of the earth, a mix of Spanish and Yaqui blood that made her an outsider in two worlds. Emiliano, she said, her voice tight as a wire. Her eyes never left one. Get inside. But Mama, he helped me with the wood. Inside. The word was final. The boy obeyed, but his face was pressed against the window pane a second later, watching, waiting. One placed the firewood on the porch and slowly raised his hands, palms open, a sign of peace. I mean no harm. That's what they all say at first, she shot back. The knife didn't waver. What does an Apache want here? Water for my horse, a place to rest for the night, nothing more. Rosario's eyes scanned him, searching for the monster she'd been told about. But she didn't find it. His eyes weren't filled with madness or rage. They were just tired. The deep, soul-weary exhaustion of a man who had walked a lonely path for a very long time. And in return? She asked, because there was always a price. There was always a catch. One simply tilted his head toward the collapsing barn. I can fix that before it falls and hurts someone. I know carpentry. I have nothing to pay you with. I did not ask for payment, just water and a place to sleep. They stood there, locked in a silent standoff. Two wounded souls, trying to measure the threat in the other. It was Emiliano who broke the spell. His small voice, muffled by the glass, floated out. Mama, the men from San Gerardo never offered to fix anything. Slowly, so slowly, Rosario lowered the knife. There's a well behind the house, she said, her voice clipped. You can camp by the barn, but you do not come inside my house. If I meant to harm you, one said, his voice calm and level, I would not have asked for permission. The raw, brutal logic of his words seemed to soothe her more than any gentle promise could have. She gave a sharp, curt nod, then disappeared inside, the door slamming shut with a sound that rattled the very foundations of the little cabin. One had a feeling it wasn't the first time that door had been slammed against the world. He led his horse to the well. As the animal drank its fill, one's eyes swept across the property. He was a warrior. He was trained to read the land, to see the story it told. And this land told a story of forced neglect. Fences broken and left to rot, a vegetable garden choked with weeds, tools rusted and abandoned. But he also saw something else. He saw signs of a fight, a fresh patch on the roof. A small, carefully tended herb garden near the back door. Clean laundry, faded and patched, flapping defiantly on a line. This was not a place of surrender. It was a place of resistance. When he started working on the barn, pulling away the rotten timbers, Emiliano appeared at his side as if from nowhere. Mama says I'm not supposed to bother you. You're not bothering me, one said without looking up. The boy sat on a rock, watching him work, his small hands clasped together. Why are you helping us? The boy asked after a long silence. You don't even know us. One paused his work. He turned to the boy. Why did you ask for my help? You didn't know me. Emiliano thought about that for a long moment. Because we tried everything else, he said finally. Mama wrote to the judge in San Gerardo. He never wrote back. She went to the church, but the priest said our problems were for men to solve. Our neighbors. They're scared of the men from San Gerardo, too. And your father? One asked gently. The boy's face clouded over. He went to fight in the war against the French, 3 years ago. Don Mateo says he's dead, but Mama doesn't believe it. She says she would feel it. Here. He tapped his small chest. If it were true. One nodded. He had seen many widows in his time. He knew the hollow look of denial. But Rosario's eyes didn't hold denial. They held defiance. She wasn't a woman who was waiting for a ghost. She was a woman who refused to bury her husband without a body. They worked for hours, one tearing down the old barn frame, Emiliano passing him tools. A strange, silent partnership. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the ravine, Rosario came out of the house. She carried a plate with beans and 2 warm tortillas. For the worker, she said, her voice stiff. She placed the plate on a nearby tree stump and turned to leave. But then she hesitated. The men, she said, her back still to him. They come on Thursdays. Today is Tuesday. It wasn't just a piece of information. It was a warning. And maybe, just maybe, it was a test. One ate in silence as the first stars pricked the deep purple of the sky. A coyote howled in the distance, and another answered from a faraway ridge. The language of the lonely, he thought. A language he understood all too well. The next morning, Wednesday, dawned heavy and gray. The clouds threatened rain but never delivered, hanging in the sky like an unspoken promise. One had slept lightly, as he always did, with one hand on the knife at his side. But the night had been still, broken only by the hoot of an owl and the soft whinny of his horse. He was up before the sun, already back at work on the barn. By noon, the main structure was straight and true. He had started replacing the rotting beams with fresh timber he'd found stacked behind the cabin. Emiliano came out after his breakfast, carrying a clay jug of cool water. Mama says you should drink this. The sun is treacherous today, even behind the clouds. One took the jug, his calloused hand brushing the boy's. He drank deeply. As he lowered the jug, he saw her, Rosario, watching him from the kitchen window. Their eyes met across the dusty yard. This time she didn't look away. Not right away. Her expression was unreadable. It wasn't trust, not yet. But the fear was gone. It had been replaced by something else. A cautious curiosity. Your mother is a brave woman, one said, his voice low enough for only the boy to hear. She's the bravest person in the whole world, Emiliano said with a fierce loyalty that made one's heart ache. When the men come, she never cries, she never begs, she just stares at them, right in the eyes, until they leave. And what do you do? One asked. The boy's gaze dropped to the dirt. I hide, he whispered. In the cellar, Mama makes me. She says it's to keep me safe, but I know the real reason. It's because if they saw me, they might. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. One understood. A 10-year-old boy was a commodity to men without souls. He could be taken. He could be sold. He could be made to work. Tomorrow, one said, his voice firm but gentle. Tomorrow, you will not hide. Emiliano's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hope. What? What will you do? Nothing your mother wouldn't approve of, one said. He paused, his eyes scanning the road leading to San Gerardo. Tell me about these men. How many are there? 4, sometimes 5. The one in charge is named Reuben. He's Don Mateo's nephew. The others are just hands from his ranch. They all have guns. One nodded slowly, filing the information away. Don Mateo. The name settled in his gut like a cold stone. He knew of Don Mateo, a man who owned most of the land and most of the people, in this valley, a man who ruled through fear. And now this was personal. This wasn't just about bullies. This was about power. He went back to his work, the rhythmic pounding of his hammer echoing through the quiet air. But his mind was somewhere else. It was back in a world of tactics and strategy, a world of shadows and surprise, a world he thought he had left behind forever. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere shifted again. Rosario came out of the cabin. She didn't just leave food this time. She walked right up to the barn, her arms crossed over her chest. Her shadow fell long over his work. For the first time, she started a conversation that wasn't about necessity. "Emiliano tells me he will not be hiding tomorrow." Her voice was flat, an accusation. "It is his choice," one replied, not stopping his work. "He is a child. He trusts your words. He does not know what he is saying." One finally set down his hammer. He turned and faced her. "A boy who is willing to bargain with a strange warrior to protect his mother is not just a child," he said, his gaze steady. "He is almost a man, and he has earned the right to feel like one." Rosario's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. "You don't know what these men are capable of." "But you do," he replied. And in the silence that followed, a truth passed between them. He did know. He knew men like Reuben. He knew men like Don Mateo. He had fought them his entire life. She finally broke the silence, her gaze fixed on the distant smudge on the horizon that was San Gerardo. "Don Mateo is my half-brother." The words came out choked, as if she had to tear them from her throat. "My father. He had an affair with a Yaqui woman. My mother. They tolerated me in his house as long as I was useful, a servant with his blood. When I became pregnant with Emiliano, and I wasn't married, they threw me out, like trash." She took a shaky breath. "Miguel, Emiliano's father, he was a good man. He didn't care about my blood or my past. We were married by a traveling priest. We bought this small piece of land with every cent we had. We were happy, and then the war came, and Miguel left." "You do not have to tell me this," one said softly. "Yes," she insisted, her voice gaining a sharp, brittle edge. "Yes, I do. Because you need to understand. When those men come here, it's not just about the food, it's a message. It's to remind me of my place, to remind me that without a man, I am nothing, that my son, my half-breed son, is worth nothing, that this land, the land my husband paid for with his own sweat and blood, will never truly be mine. Because I am a woman, and because I am Indian." One looked at her then, and he didn't see a victim. He saw a warrior fighting a different kind of war, a war of quiet endurance, of silent dignity, a war fought with patched roofs and clean laundry and a refusal to cry. "Your son," he said, and it was the first time he had offered a personal opinion since he arrived, "is worth more than every man in San Gerardo combined." A flicker of something, surprise, gratitude, maybe even a ghost of a smile, touched her lips. "I think so too." She turned to go back to the house, but stopped at the door. "If tomorrow, if it goes wrong—" "It will not," he said with a certainty that seemed to come from the earth itself. "But if it does," she insisted, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, "I want you to take Emiliano. Take him and run. He has an aunt in Tucson. He knows the address. Promise me." One looked from her desperate eyes to the boy's face, still watching from the window. He gave a single, solemn nod. It was a promise a man gives only when he understands the stakes. It was the kind of promise a mother only asks for when she has looked into the abyss and imagined the worst possible ending. That night, when Rosario left his dinner on the stump, there was something extra. A small piece of sweet bread, the kind reserved for feast days and celebrations. A tiny, fragile offering of hope. One ate it slowly, tasting not just the cinnamon and sugar, but the weight of the trust it represented. Somewhere inside that dark, quiet cabin, a woman was gambling her entire world on the strength of a stranger. An act of pure, terrifying faith. Or perhaps the last desperate move of a woman with nothing left to lose. Thursday. The day dawned hot and bright, the sky a merciless, brilliant blue. One had been awake for hours, not working, preparing. He cleaned his knife until it shone. He checked the tension of his bowstring. He ran a feather over the fletching of each arrow. Not because he planned to use them. Not yet. But the ritual, the familiar motions, calmed the storm inside him. It was a warrior's meditation. Emiliano came out as the sun climbed higher. He was wearing his best shirt, a faded blue cotton thing that was a little too small for him. His eyes were wide, a chaotic mix of fear and adrenaline. "What do I do?" he whispered, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "When they get here, what do I do?" "You will stand beside your mother," one said, his voice low and steady. "You will not speak unless you are spoken to. You will not show them your fear, but you will not provoke them, and no matter what happens, you do not run. Do you understand?" The boy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. He nodded. Rosario emerged near midday. She had braided her long, dark hair. She wore a simple, clean dress. It was her battle armor. It was her way of telling the world and herself that she was not broken. "They come after lunch," she said, her voice strained. "Always." "I will be on the roof," one replied, "fixing the shingles. They will not see me until I want them to." She gave him a look. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. It was understanding. She saw the strategy. Don't escalate, don't provoke. Just be ready. A predator, waiting in plain sight. It was just after 1 o'clock when they heard it. The rhythmic thud of horses' hooves on the dry, packed earth. 4 riders. They came into view, dark shapes shimmering in the heat haze. The man in front, Reuben, had a thick mustache that he probably thought made him look imposing. It only made him look foolish. The 3 men with him were young ranch hands, the kind of men who follow orders because they are too bored or too stupid to think for themselves. Reuben swung off his horse, his spurs jingling. "Good afternoon, Rosario," he said, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "Time for the weekly contribution to the prosperity of San Gerardo." "Reuben," Rosario replied, her voice a flat, dead thing. "I have something for you." It was then that Reuben noticed the boy. Emiliano was standing right beside his mother, his small shoulders squared, his chin held high. "Well, well," Reuben sneered. "Look what we have here. The little rat finally came out of his hole." "He is 10 years old," Rosario said, her voice dangerously quiet. "He is still a child." "Children grow up fast out here," Reuben said, taking a step closer. "Maybe it's time he started earning his keep. We can always use another hand at the ranch." He was threatening to take her son, right in front of her. And that's when one made his move. He didn't climb down. He dropped. He landed on the balls of his feet in the dust behind the men, as silent as a hawk's shadow. By the time they heard the soft thud and spun around, he was already standing by the well, casually wiping his hands on a rag as if he'd been there all day. "Who in the hell are you?" Reuben barked, his hand instinctively flying to the pistol on his hip. "The carpenter," one said calmly. "The lady of the house hired me to fix the barn." The 4 men exchanged uneasy glances. An Apache, working for Rosario. This wasn't part of the plan. This changed things. "I didn't know you had money to be hiring carpenters, Rosario," Reuben sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. "I work for food and a place to sleep," one interjected smoothly, before Rosario could answer. "It is a fair trade." "Nobody asked you, Indian," one of the ranch hands spat. One smiled. but it was a cold thing. A smile that held no warmth, no humor. A smile that didn't touch his eyes. "True," he said. "Forgive my interruption. I just thought you might want to know. The structure of that barn was so rotten, a strong wind could have brought the whole thing down. It would have been a real shame to lose everything stored inside." It was a lie, a carefully crafted lure. He was suggesting there was something valuable in the barn, something worth protecting, something worth stealing. Reuben took the bait, his eyes narrowed with greed. "What's in the barn?" "Oh, the usual," one said with a dismissive shrug. "Old tools, some seed for planting. Though—" he paused, pretending to think. "I did find some old crates tucked away in the loft. Looked like they belonged to her husband. I haven't opened them. Not my business." The hook was set. Everyone in the valley knew Miguel Herrera had been a hard worker, a man who saved. Who knew what treasures he might have hidden away before he went off to war? "Maybe we ought to take a look," one of the younger men said, his eyes gleaming. "Maybe you should," one agreed easily. Although what?" Reuben demanded. "It's probably nothing," one said, waving a hand. "Just, for a moment I thought I saw an army seal on the side of one of the crates. But I must have been mistaken. A simple soldier like him wouldn't have access to military supplies. Never mind." The hook was now buried deep. Army supplies could mean anything: rifles, ammunition, payroll. Reuben's greed was now warring with his caution, and greed was winning. He dismounted, his men following his lead. "Let's go take a look at these." "Crates." "Of course," one said, gesturing toward the barn. "Be my guest. Watch the third step on the porch. It's a bit loose." As the four men stomped past him and into the dark interior of the barn, one caught Rosario's eye. He gave a barely perceptible nod. She understood instantly. She grabbed Emiliano's hand, pulling him back toward the house, ready to run if this went wrong. Inside the barn, the men tore the place apart. They threw aside old tools, kicked over sacks of seed, frantically searching for the non-existent treasure. The air grew thick with dust and curses. When they finally realized they had been played for fools, they turned, their faces contorted with rage, and stormed toward the door. But it was too late. One had already swung the heavy barn door shut and dropped a thick wooden beam into the iron brackets on the outside. They were trapped. "You son of a— Open this door!" Reuben's voice was a muffled roar of fury from inside. One stepped up to the door, placing his hands flat against the rough wood. "Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and clear, easily carrying through the door. "Because I will only say this once. You will leave this family alone. You will not come back. There will be no more contributions. No more threats. If I ever see you on this land again, I will make sure that everyone in San Gerardo, including your uncle Don Mateo, finds out what really happened to that army payroll shipment that went missing near Fort Selden last year." There was a dead, stunned silence from inside the barn. "Oh, yes," one continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I know all about it. I know you and your men staged a robbery. I know you sold the rifles and ammunition to smugglers heading for Mexico, and I know you pocketed the gold. Don Mateo has no idea, does he? He thinks it was a real robbery. How much do you think your life is worth to him if he finds out his own nephew betrayed him and stole from the army, bringing that kind of heat down on his entire operation?" It was a complete and utter bluff. One knew nothing about a missing payroll. But he knew men like Reuben were always dirty. There was always some secret, some crime, hidden just beneath the surface. And fear was the best key to unlock it. I don't know what you're talking about," Reuben stammered from inside, but the tremor of pure terror in his voice was a confession. "Then you have nothing to worry about," one said smoothly. "But if you come back here, a very detailed letter will find its way to your uncle. Do we have an understanding?" A frantic murmur of agreement came from within. "I am going to open this door now," one said. "You will get on your horses. You will ride away, and you will never come back. If anyone asks, you will tell them that Rosario's debt is paid, that her husband settled everything before he left for the war. Is that clear?" "Yes," came the weak, defeated reply. One lifted the heavy beam and pulled the door open. The four men stumbled out into the bright sunlight, blinking like creatures of the dark. Their faces were a mess of shame, fear, and impotent rage. They scrambled for their horses without another word. But just before he spurred his horse into a gallop, Reuben turned in his saddle, his face a mask of hatred. "This isn't over, Apache." "You're right," one said, his voice as cold as a desert night. "It is not over. It is just beginning, because next time, I will not be so polite." The men vanished in a cloud of dust. Emiliano stared at one, his face a perfect picture of hero worship. Rosario's eyes were shining with tears, but for the first time, they were not tears of sorrow. How did you know?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "About the payroll?" "I didn't," one said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "But a rat will always lead you to its nest if you follow it long enough." For the first time since he had met her, Rosario laughed. It was a rusty, unused sound, like a gate hinge that hadn't been opened in years. But it was real, and it was beautiful. "Thank you," she said, the words simple but holding the weight of the world. "Don't thank me yet," one replied, his gaze already scanning the horizon. "They will be back. Maybe not Reuben. But Don Mateo will not let this go. An insult to his family is an insult to him. San Gerardo does not forgive, and it does not forget." "Then what do we do?" she asked, the laughter dying in her throat, replaced by a new, cold dread. One looked from her face to the small, determined face of her son. "We prepare," he said. "I will teach you, both of you, how to fight, how to survive, and then we wait." The weeks that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. Life on the small, isolated homestead was no longer just about survival. It was about preparation. One finished his work on the barn, making it stronger and more secure than it had ever been. Then he moved to the house. He reinforced the door and the window frames. He showed Rosario how to build a false wall in the cellar, creating a hidden space for supplies or for hiding. He even cleared the brush from the hills around the cabin, creating clear lines of sight, turning their vulnerable home into a defensible position. But the real work was not with wood and nails. It was with them. He started with Emiliano. He took the boy into the desert and taught him the ancient arts of the Apache. How to track an animal or a man. How to move through the brush without making a sound. How to read the signs in the wind, the flight of a bird, the sudden silence of the insects. The boy soaked it all up like the dry earth soaks up a summer rain. He was a natural, his senses already sharpened by years of living on the edge of fear. One afternoon, as they were practicing with a small bow one had made for him, Emiliano asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Why did you leave your tribe? Why don't you fight with them?" One stopped and looked at the boy. He didn't offer a simple answer. He gave the question the respect it deserved. "What is more brave, little warrior?" he asked. "To do what everyone expects of you, even if you believe it is wrong, or to do what your heart tells you is right, even if it means you must walk your path alone?" Emiliano didn't have an answer, but the question settled deep inside him, a seed of wisdom that would grow with him. His lessons with Rosario were different, more brutal, more direct. He taught her how to handle the rifle her husband had left behind, not like a sportsman, but like a soldier. He taught her how to reload quickly, how to aim for the center of mass, how to control her breathing to steady her shot. He showed her the weak points on a man's body, where to strike with a knife or a rock or her bare hands to disable, to stop a threat. "I don't like this," she confessed one evening after a particularly grueling session. Her knuckles were raw, her muscles aching. "I don't want to become like them, full of hate and violence." "You will not," one assured her, his voice gentle. "They find joy in causing pain. You would only use this to protect what you love. That is the difference between a monster and a guardian." As the days turned into weeks, something else began to grow between them, something that had nothing to do with survival. The nights, once filled with a tense, watchful silence, were now filled with quiet conversation. They would sit outside by a small fire, Emiliano asleep inside, and they would talk. Rosario told him about her childhood, about her Yaqui mother who taught her which plants could heal a fever and which could soothe a wound. One, in turn, shared the legends of his people, stories of mountain spirits and coyote tricksters. He told her what his talismans meant. "Why 3?" she asked one night, her finger gently tracing the outline of one of the carved wooden pieces around his neck. His hand instinctively went to them. "One for each of the children I will never have," he said, his voice heavy with a sorrow that time had not erased. "My wife. She died giving birth to our first son. The baby did not survive either. The other 2 are for the children who were never conceived." "I am so sorry," she whispered. "It was a long time ago," he said. "But pain is a great teacher. It taught me that violence only ever creates more empty spaces, more loss. That is why I left. My people chose the path of war. I could not." In that moment, Rosario did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out with an instinct she thought had died. She placed her hand on his arm, a simple human gesture of comfort. When her skin touched his, a current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a shared loneliness, a shared pain. They both pulled back quickly, as if burned, but the moment lingered in the cool night air, unspoken, but felt by both of them. From his bed by the window, Emiliano watched them. He was only 10, but he understood the language of adults better than they thought. He saw the way his mother's smile, once so rare, now appeared whenever one was near. He saw the way one's gaze would follow her as she worked, a look of quiet admiration and something deeper. He saw how they found reasons to be near each other, their hands brushing as they passed, their shoulders touching as they looked up at the stars. One morning, over a simple breakfast of beans and tortillas, Emiliano finally asked the question that was hanging in the air between the 3 of them, as thick and heavy as the summer heat. "Are you going to stay with us? Forever?" The silence that fell over the small kitchen was absolute. Rosario stared down at her plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. One looked at the boy, his expression serious. "I do not know what forever means, Emiliano," he said, his voice honest and raw. "But I will not leave this place as long as I am needed." "We need you," the boy said, with a simple, unwavering conviction. "Mama is happier now that you're here. And so am I." Rosario looked mortified, a deep blush rising on her cheeks. "Emiliano!" But the boy didn't back down. "What? It's the truth. Why can't grown-ups just say what's true?" One almost smiled. "Because sometimes, little warrior, the truth is more frightening than any lie." "Well, that's just dumb," Emiliano declared, and with the matter settled in his mind, he went back to his breakfast, oblivious to the fact that he had just shattered the fragile peace of their unspoken arrangement. That afternoon, as one was showing Emiliano how to carve a small bird from a piece of scrap wood, they saw it, a plume of dust on the horizon. But it wasn't 4 riders. It was a single, slow-moving wagon, and the man driving it was wearing black. "Father Francisco," Rosario murmured, wiping her hands on her apron as she came out onto the porch. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. What could he possibly want? The priest pulled his tired-looking mule to a halt and climbed down from the wagon with the stiff movements of an old man. His face was a road map of wrinkles, carved by 60 years under the unforgiving desert sun. "Rosario?" he greeted her, his eyes kind. Then his gaze shifted to one. There was curiosity in his look, but no judgment. "You must be the man who has all of San Gerardo talking." "Father," Rosario interjected quickly, "he is just a carpenter. He's been helping with repairs." "I did not come here to pass judgment, my child," the priest said, his voice gentle but firm. "I came to deliver a warning. Don Mateo is not a man who forgives easily. He is furious about what happened to his nephew. He's talking about calling in the Rangers." Rosario's face went white. "The Texas Rangers. Their name was a curse in this part of the country. They were known for their ruthlessness, for shooting first and never asking questions, especially when an Apache was involved." "I managed to convince him to wait," the priest continued. "I told him I would come out here myself to see the situation. But my influence with him is limited. He is not a man who listens to the church for long." "What do you suggest we do, Father?" one asked, his voice blunt. The priest studied him for a long moment. "I suggest that you leave," he said finally, "for your own safety, and for theirs." "No." The word came from Emiliano, who had stepped forward to stand beside his mother. "He's not leaving. This is our home, and he is our friend." Rosario placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. "My son is right, Father. We do not abandon our friends." Father Francisco let out a long, weary sigh. "I had hoped for more wisdom from you, Rosario, but I see your heart is speaking louder than your head." "And since when is it wise to surrender to evil, Father?" Rosario's voice was quiet, but it burned with a righteous fire. "My husband went to fight for what he believed was just. Am I to do any less to protect my own home?" The priest looked at her, and a new respect dawned in his old eyes. He reached inside his black cassock and pulled out a worn, official-looking envelope. "This arrived for you 2 months ago," he said. "I did not give it to you then because, well, I feared the news it contained would only bring more pain. But now you must know." With trembling hands, Rosario took the letter. It was from the army. The postmark was 6 months old. As her eyes flew across the page, her knees buckled. One was there in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. "Mama!" Emiliano cried, rushing to her side. "Your father!" she whispered, her voice a strangled, disbelieving sound. She looked up at one, her eyes wild with a hope so fierce it was terrifying. He's alive." The world seemed to stop. Emiliano gasped, but one saw something else in her face, a shadow behind the hope. "He was taken prisoner a year ago. He escaped," she continued, reading from the page. "But what?" one pressed gently. "There is more." Her eyes filled with tears. "They don't know where he is, and, oh God, he's been officially listed as a deserter." The priest nodded grimly. "That is why I hesitated. A deserter has no rights, Rosario, no protection. If the army finds him, they will execute him on the spot." "Unless," one said, his mind racing, piecing it all together, "unless someone can prove he did not desert, that he was only trying to get home." The priest reached into his robe again and pulled out a second piece of paper. "This is a sworn testimony from another man who escaped from the same prison camp. He was found a month ago. He says that Miguel Herrera spoke of nothing but his wife and son, that he was obsessed with returning home. He was not a deserter. He was just a desperate man." "Why are you only showing us this now?" one asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. The priest's face was grim. "Because Don Mateo knows about this. He has his spies everywhere. He is willing to use this against you. He has sent men out to find Miguel, not to help him. but to capture him and turn him over to the army as a deserter. He will see your husband hanged, unless you give him what he wants, which is for this man," he nodded at one, "to be gone, and for you to be back under his control." "That bastard," Rosario spat, forgetting the priest's presence. "I have a proposal," the priest said quickly. "There is a judge in Tucson, an honest man, a rarity these days. Judge Harlan. He is not in Don Mateo's pocket. If you can get this testimony to him, there is a chance, a small chance, that he might issue a preemptive pardon for Miguel. But the journey is long and dangerous. Don Mateo will have men watching all the main roads." "We will go," one said without a moment's hesitation. "You do not get to make that decision for us," Rosario snapped, her emotions a raw, tangled mess. "I am not making a decision," one replied, his gaze calm and steady. "I am making an offer. The choice, as always, is yours." Rosario looked at the letter in her hand, the proof that the man she loved was alive. She looked at her son, his face a mixture of hope and fear. And then she looked at the warrior, the stranger who had, in a few short weeks, brought more safety and strength to their lives than they had known in 3 long years. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for us? Risk your life for us?" One's hand went to the talismans at his neck, a gesture she now understood. "Because once," he said, his voice so low she could barely hear it, "someone should have done something to help my family, and they did not. I will not make that same mistake." The decision was made in the fading light of that impossible day. They would go to Tucson. Father Francisco promised to create a diversion, to spread rumors in San Gerardo that the Apache had fled east toward the mountains, drawing Don Mateo's men away from the western trail. They packed light and fast, water skins, dried meat, blankets, and every weapon they owned. 3 days if the spirits are with us," one said as he checked the saddle on his horse. 5 if we have to hide. Their first night they made a cold camp in a rocky canyon one knew from his years of wandering. Emiliano, exhausted by the day's ride and the emotional turmoil, fell asleep almost instantly. Rosario and one sat together, sharing the watch. The desert around them was vast and silent, the sky a breathtaking canopy of stars. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice a whisper in the great quiet. "Fear is a wise companion," he replied. "It keeps you awake. It keeps you alive." "It's not for myself that I'm afraid," she said, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm afraid to hope again. For 3 years I let myself believe Miguel was gone. It was a clean pain, a scar. But now, this hope. It's a fresh wound. What if we get there and it's too late? What if he's already been found? What if this is all some cruel trap set by my brother?" One was silent for a long time, considering her words. "Which would you rather have, Rosario?" he asked finally. "The certainty of despair, or the uncertainty of hope?" She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know what I want anymore. I just know that since you came here, I have started to feel things again, things I thought I had buried with my husband. Not just about Miguel, about life." Their eyes met in the flickering starlight. A universe of unspoken feelings passed between them. The truth of their connection, the impossible timing, the man who stood, living or dead, between them. Rosario looked away first, her gaze drawn to the distant constellations. "My husband, he is a good man," she said, as if reminding herself. "If he is alive, he deserves to come home to his family. He deserves his life back. And you," one replied softly, "deserve to be happy, whatever form that happiness may take." They spoke no more of it that night, but later, as Emiliano stirred in his sleep, he opened his eyes for a moment. He saw his mother and the warrior, sitting closer than they needed to for warmth, their shoulders almost touching, two lonely figures staring up at the infinite, silent stars, as if trying to read their own tangled futures there. The second day brought trouble. One found tracks, fresh tracks. At least 5 horses, shod in the way of the men from San Gerardo. They were being followed, or hunted. One immediately changed their course, leaving the trail and heading into the rugged, broken country of the high desert. It was slower, harder going, but it offered more cover. But they weren't fast enough. At dusk on the third day, as they were making their way through a narrow, winding arroyo, the trap was sprung. 5 men on horseback blocked the path ahead, their figures silhouetted against the dying sun. They were not Don Mateo's men. Their clothes were rougher, their faces harder. These were bandits, vultures who preyed on anyone foolish enough to travel these forgotten trails. "Well now, what do we have here?" the leader said, a man with a jagged scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. "An Indian, a pretty little thing, and a boy. Where you folks headed in such a big hurry?" One slid silently from his horse, positioning himself between the bandits and Rosario and Emiliano. He held his hands up, open and non-threatening. "We are just travelers," he said, his voice calm. "We want no trouble." The man with the scar laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Nobody ever wants trouble," he sneered. "But trouble has a way of finding you, especially when you're carrying something valuable. We carry nothing of value." "We'll be the judge of that," the man said. "Boys, check their packs." As 2 of the men dismounted and started to advance, Emiliano did something no one expected. He stepped out from behind his mother's legs, his small body trembling but his voice clear and loud. "My father is a soldier in the army. If you touch us, he'll hunt you down with his whole battalion." The bandits roared with laughter. "A soldier, is he?" the leader mocked. "And where might this soldier father of yours be, boy?" "Right behind us," Emiliano said without missing a beat. "That's why we're riding so fast. We're meeting him." It was a brilliant lie. For a split second, it gave the bandits pause. They exchanged uncertain glances, but the leader was smarter than the others. "Nice try, kid," he said, his smile returning. "But if your daddy was really Army, you wouldn't be traveling with a filthy Apache." He drew his pistol. "Kill the Indian. The woman and the boy are mine." The first bandit never even cleared his holster. An arrow seemed to materialize out of the twilight, striking him in the shoulder with a sickening thud, knocking him clean off his horse. Before the second man could react, the crack of Rosario's rifle echoed through the narrow canyon. He crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Her training had not been in vain. "Down!" one yelled, and Emiliano instantly obeyed, grabbing his mother's skirt and pulling her down behind the cover of a large boulder. The arroyo exploded into a chaos of gunfire and shouting. One moved like a ghost, using the rocks and the deepening shadows as his allies. His knowledge of the terrain, his years of fighting in exactly this kind of landscape, gave him an advantage that pistols and numbers could not overcome. He was a phantom, his arrows flying from the darkness, silent and deadly. When the dust finally settled and the echoes of the last gunshot faded away, 3 of the bandits lay still on the canyon floor. A 4th had fled, his horse's frantic hoofbeats already disappearing into the distance. The leader, the man with the scar, was on his knees, clutching his thigh where one of one's arrows was buried deep. "Please," he whimpered, his bravado gone, replaced by the terrified babbling of a wounded animal. "Don't kill me. I have a family. Children." Rosario stepped out from behind the rock, the rifle still hot in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes were like chips of obsidian. "So do we," she said, her voice hard and cold. She walked toward the man and leveled the rifle at his head. "Now get on your horse, and you tell every cutthroat and coward you meet that this family—" This family is protected." The man scrambled away, half crawling, half limping, leaving a dark trail of blood in the dust behind him. That night, they didn't sleep. They tended to their wounds, a shallow graze on Rosario's arm, a cut on one's forehead, and tried to calm the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. One sat with Emiliano, who was quiet and shaken, and explained that what they had done was necessary. It was not murder. It was protection. And in the shared crucible of that violent desert twilight, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer just three people traveling together out of necessity. They were a unit, a pack, a family forged in gunfire and blood. They reached Tucson 2 days later, exhausted and wary, but alive. Judge Harlan was everything Father Francisco had promised, a stern, no-nonsense man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was a veteran of the war himself, a man who understood that the lines between duty, desperation, and desertion could sometimes blur into nothing. He read the soldier's testimony, his brow furrowed in concentration. He asked Rosario a series of sharp, pointed questions about her husband, about their life, about Don Mateo. Finally, he slammed a heavy seal onto a piece of paper. "This is a provisional pardon," he declared, his voice booming in the quiet office. "It doesn't guarantee your husband will be found alive, ma'am, but if he is, he will be brought here for questioning, not shot in the field as a deserter." "It is more than we could have hoped for, Your Honor," Rosario said, her voice thick with gratitude. "There is one more thing," the judge said, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on her. "I have received inquiries about you. From San Gerardo. Don Mateo's influence reaches farther than you think. He pressured me to deny this pardon. But I also received another message. A coded letter from Father Francisco. He suggested there might be some documents in the county records office that you would find. Illuminating. They found them in a dusty ledger, buried under years of paperwork. The original deeds to the land in their valley. And the proof. Irrefutable proof that Don Mateo had been systematically forging documents for years, illegally seizing land from smaller homesteaders, including the parcel that Miguel had legally bought and paid for. With certified copies of the original deeds in her hands, Rosario now held not just a pardon for her husband, but a weapon against her brother. The journey home was different. The air itself felt lighter, clearer. They had faced death and won. They had faced the law and won. They had hope. But as they rode, another, more complicated tension grew between Rosario and Juan. The unspoken thing that had been sparked by a touch in the darkness was now a steady fire. With the very real possibility of Miguel's return, their future was more uncertain than ever. "If he comes back," she said one night as they sat by the fire, Emiliano sleeping nearby. "Everything will be different." "I know," one replied, his gaze fixed on the flames. "You would. You would leave?" "I will do what is right for your family," he said, and the honor in his voice was as solid and unshakable as the mountains around them. "And what if," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "what if the right thing for my family is for you to stay?" He had no answer for her, but she saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the war raging inside him, the battle between his heart and his honor. And she knew, with a sudden aching certainty, that whatever happened, someone's heart was going to be broken. When they arrived back at the cabin, they found a miracle. The place was transformed. The leaning barn was not just repaired, it was rebuilt. The fences were mended. The garden was weeded and planted. Their small, empty pantry was filled with sacks of flour, beans, and corn. Their neighbors, the same people who had been too afraid to help, had come. Inspired by the story of their defiance, which Father Francisco had wasted no time in spreading, and shamed by their own cowardice, They had finally found their courage. The priest had stood in the church on Sunday and read aloud the evidence of Don Mateo's land fraud. The town had erupted. Faced with an open rebellion, Don Mateo had fled, taking his hired guns with him. He went to the capital, their neighbor, a farmer named Juan Dios, told them. He says he will be back with soldiers to enforce his legal claims. But many of us think he is just a coward who will never show his face here again. You, Rosario, you broke his power. You showed us we did not have to live in fear. That night, they had a quiet celebration inside the sturdy little cabin. As Rosario served a stew made with the food their neighbors had given them, Emiliano, with his uncanny ability to cut straight to the heart of things, looked from his mother to Juan. "We're a real family now, aren't we?" he said. "Not by blood, but for real." Rosario looked at Juan, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "Yes, mijo," she said softly. "We are a family." Months passed. A quiet, peaceful autumn gave way to a cold, crisp winter. Don Mateo did not return. Word came from the capital that his crimes had been exposed, and he was now a fugitive himself. A new era of cautious optimism began to dawn in San Gerardo. People started to believe that they could be the masters of their own lives. One built himself a small one-room cabin a short distance from the main house. For privacy, he told them. But they all knew the real reason. It was his way of staying, of being a part of their lives while still maintaining a respectful distance, honoring the ghost of the man who might one day return. He was a guardian, a friend, a teacher, but not yet anything more. And then, one bright, warm afternoon in early spring, the final act of their story began. A figure appeared on the road, a long way off. A man walking with a slow, painful limp. He was gaunt, his clothes in tatters, his face obscured by a thick, matted beard. He was unrecognizable, but a wife knows. Rosario stopped what she was doing, a basket of laundry dropping from her hands. A single word escaped her lips, a whispered prayer. Miguel. And then she was running. One watched from the porch of his small cabin. He watched her run to the stranger. He watched the man's arms, thin and scarred, wrap around her. He watched Emiliano, who had followed his mother, leap into his father's embrace. He saw the tears. He heard the choked sounds of a family, broken for so long, finally being made whole again. And he knew. It was time for him to leave. That night, a joyous, chaotic reunion filled the main house. Laughter and stories and tears of relief echoed through the thin walls. In his own small, silent cabin, one packed his few belongings into a saddlebag. His knife, his bow, a spare shirt, his talismans. He was ready to slip away before sunrise, to disappear back into the desert from whence he came. But before he could leave, a shadow fell across his doorway. It was Miguel. They had not yet spoken, had not yet been properly introduced. Up close, Miguel was shorter than Juan and looked 10 years older than his age. The prison camp had taken its toll. But there was an unbreakable strength in his eyes, the same defiant fire that Juan had seen in his wife and son. "Rosario, she told me everything," Miguel said, his voice raspy from disuse. "Everything you did, for my family." "Any decent man would have done the same," Juan replied, his voice neutral. "No," Miguel said, shaking his head. "Not any man. We both know that's not true." He gestured to a stump outside the cabin door. "Sit with me, please." Juan sat. The two men, the husband who had returned and the warrior who had taken his place, sat in the cool night air. The sounds of the happy reunion in the house, a strange backdrop to their silent tension. "She told me other things, too," Miguel said finally, his gaze fixed on the distant stars. "Things she didn't say with words, but I understand." One remained silent. What was there to say? "The war, the prison, it changed me," Miguel continued, his voice low and full of pain. I saw things. I did things. To survive. I am not the same man who left this place 3 years ago. And Rosario. She is not the same woman. She is stronger now. She stands taller. You helped her find that strength. That strength was always there, one said. She just needed a reason to remember she had it. Miguel nodded. I spent a year in that hellhole dreaming of coming home. But the home I dreamed of, it doesn't exist anymore. Things have changed, and maybe that is a good thing. He paused. I do not understand. Miguel looked at him, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. My body is broken, he said. He lifted his shirt. In the moonlight, one could see a network of terrible, deep scars across his chest and stomach. The camp doctors. They said the damage is too deep. The fever I had, it ruined my insides. They told me I do not have long. A year. Maybe 2 if I am lucky. I am sorry, one said, and he meant it. I do not have time for lies or pride, Miguel said, his voice gaining a sudden urgency. I want my son to have a real father who can teach him and protect him, not a broken ghost who will fade away. I want Rosario to be happy, to be safe, and I see the way she looks at you, and the way you look at her. Miguel, no. Let me finish, he insisted. I do not have much time on this earth. I will not waste it on jealousy. I will ask you one question. A man's question. Do you love her? The question hung in the air between them, stark and unavoidable. Yes, one said finally, the word torn from him. And do you love my son? As if he were your own? I already do. A slow smile spread across Miguel's tired face. For the first time since his return, he looked truly at peace. Then stay, he said. Do not leave. Stay, not as a friend, but as part of this family. Among my wife's people, and among yours, there are rights. Ways for 2 men to become brothers. Let us be brothers. And when my time comes, you will take care of them for me, as a husband, as a father. I cannot, one whispered, his own code of honor warring with the impossible gift he was being offered. You can, Miguel said, his voice firm. And you will, because you are an honorable man, and because they need you, and because... His voice softened. Because we all deserve a small piece of happiness in this hard, cruel life. The months that followed were both strange and beautiful. The 3 of them, Miguel, Rosario, and one, with Emiliano at their center, forged a new kind of family. A family that defied all conventions, shocking some of their neighbors and inspiring others. During the day, Miguel, his strength failing, would sit on the porch and teach Emiliano to read and write, skills he had learned in the army. In the afternoons, one would take the boy out and continue his lessons in tracking and survival. Rosario, with a fierce and boundless love, cared for them all. At night, when the pain in Miguel's body was too great for him to sleep, one would sit with him. They would talk for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, of battles won and lost, of loves found and taken away. They became what Miguel had wanted. They became brothers, bound by a shared love for the same woman and the same boy. Miguel lived for 14 more months. He died on a cool summer evening in his own bed, with Rosario holding one of his hands and one holding the other. His last words were to his son. Take care of your mother, he whispered, and listen to your father. One is a good man. The grief was real and deep, but after the mourning had passed, what was left was not a broken home, but a family that had been chosen, not born. A family that had been blessed by the dying wish of a good and selfless man. 6 months after they buried Miguel on a hill overlooking the cabin, Father Francisco performed another ceremony, a small, quiet wedding, joining Rosario and one in marriage. This is highly irregular, the old priest had grumbled when they asked him. But these are irregular times, and a love this true is so rare, it would be a sin against God himself not to bless it. Emiliano, now 12 years old and growing like a weed, stood as their witness. When the priest asked the traditional question, "Who gives this woman?" it was the boy who stepped forward. "I do," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And I give myself too. We're a package deal." Laughter filled the small sunlit chapel. Even some of the folks from San Gerardo were there, their old prejudices washed away by the simple, powerful story of their love. The years flowed by like a gentle river. The house grew, with new rooms added on. The fields flourished, and more children came. A daughter, with her mother's fierce eyes and her father's quiet spirit. A son, with an easy laugh and hands that were born to build. Emiliano grew into a fine young man. He became a teacher, building a small school where he taught the children of all the valley's families, Apache and Mexican alike. He married the daughter of their old neighbor, Juan Dios. And when their first son was born, they named him Miguel Juan, in honor of the two fathers who had shaped him. Our story ends many, many years later. One is an old man now, his hair as white as the winter snow. He sits under the shade of a large plum tree, a tree he and Rosario planted in their first year of marriage. Rosario sits beside him. Her hair is silver now, but her eyes are still as bright as ever. "Do you have any regrets?" she asks him. It is a game they play, a question she has asked him 1,000 times. "What would I regret?" he replies, his hand finding hers, their fingers lacing together in a familiar, comfortable pattern. "I came here seeking only a drink of water, and I found everything I had ever lost." Emiliano, a man now with children of his own, walks toward them. His youngest son, the boy named for two grandfathers, runs ahead and scrambles into one's lap. "Grandpa One," the boy says, "look what I made." He holds up a small, crudely carved piece of wood, a talisman. One takes it and examines it with great seriousness. "It is perfect," he declares. "Do you know what these represent?" "Protection," the boy says proudly. "Protection," one agrees, his eyes sweeping over the faces of his family, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, all gathering for Sunday dinner. And family, always family. The sun sets behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Hanging from the branches of the old plum tree, dozens of small wooden talismans now twist in the gentle evening breeze. One for every member of this improbable, unbreakable family. And in the quiet whisper of the desert wind, you can almost hear the voices of the ancestors nodding in approval. Because in the end, love knows no tribe, no borders, no rules. It only knows brave hearts, willing to choose hope over fear, compassion over hate, and family over the long, lonely darkness. The old cabin, once a place of desperation, had become a beacon of joy, and under its roof, a simple and powerful truth had taken root and blossomed. We are always stronger together than we are apart. If you enjoyed this story and believe in the power of hope and second chances, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let us know in the comments what part of the story touched you the most. Until next time, stay strong and protect your family.